I'm going to be speaking to you today about the fourth Perek of Sefer Tehillim. This Perek is similar to many of the other Prakim that are found in the beginning of Sefer Tehillim, in that it begins with an indication that it was written by David HaMelech, and that it was specifically written for melodic accompaniment and to be sung as a song. Hence the opening pasuk, La Menatzeach B'Neginos Mizmor David. This whole collection of Mizmorim, the first number of Prakim in Sefer Tehillim, were all meant to be accompanied by music and perhaps to be sung by the Leviim in the Beis HaMikdash. What exactly occurred at this point in David's life that inspired this particular Perek is not entirely clear. Many of the Mefarshim speculate on different events in David's life that might be responsible for him writing this particular Perek. For example, the Radak believes that it may be associated with when he was on the run, being hunted by his son Avshalom. The Malbim, on the other hand, believes it may be associated with the major famine that occurred during his reign. The bottom line is that nobody really knows, and other Mefarshim speculate on other possibilities. The one thing that all the Mefarshim hold in common, however, in interpreting this particular Perek of Tehillim, is that it was written specifically to apply to anybody who finds himself in distress or pursued by adversaries or is trying to make sense of life in general. And therefore, like most of the other Prakim in Tehillim, has a very, very general tone to it, and the content can be understood in a very general way. The Perek begins, therefore, with a very general type of statement. Bekari aneni elokei tzidki, when I call out to you, you answer me, the God of righteousness. Batsar hechaftali, right? When I'm in my distress, you've always been there for me. You've relieved me of my distress. Elokei tzidki batsar hechaftali, chaneni ushma tfilasi. Right? You've have been gracious to me, and you've heard or listened to my prayer. Rav Hirsch has an interesting comment on the definition of a tefillah in this particular case. He says that it's not simply the bakasha, the request from God that many people think of it as. To quote him, he says that David, when he approaches God, when he cries out to God, and he sees God answer him, he's filled with this newly won peace of mind. He now rises to tefillah. Unlike tachana and bakasha, tefillah is not simply a plea directed to God. His palal, derived from the term pilel, to reason, means to acquire through the power of reasoning the proper discernment of what is good and true, to gain from God the proper perspective and the correct attitude. So Rav Hirsch sees tefillah, especially as referred to in this particular Mizmor, as not simply an opportunity to pour out your heart to God, but also an opportunity to gain a deeper understanding that God is always there for you and that you can rely on God. So in this sense, Rav Hirsch sees tefillah as doing more for the mispalel, more for the person who's offering a tefillah, than necessarily as a means of communicating for God. It's a means of acquiring wisdom. Now, what has gotten David so upset? He is never quite clear about it in this Mizmor, but he does allude to it in Pasuk Gimel, in which he says, B'nei ish, adme kvodi lichlima, right, you sons of man. And again, it's not entirely clear who these sons of man are, depending upon which Rishon you're reading, and who they, at what particular point in David's life they feel this Mizmor was being composed. It could be any number of different people. But he goes, B'nei ish adme kvodi lichlima, how long will my honor be disgraced? How long will you denigrate me? Te'ahavun rik, right? How long will you love futility? How long will you attach yourself to doing things that are vain and will have no outcome, no positive outcome? Tevakshu kazav sela, right? How long will you seek lies? Again, that word sela implying at the end of a pasuk that it's something that's interminable, something going on. Whoever the adversaries are that are prompting David to offer this particular mizmor, They're individuals who seem to be in perpetual disagreement with him, perpetually attacking him, and are calling his kavod into question. All right. However, he immediately takes knowledge in the fact that God is going to, or takes comfort, I should say, in the knowledge that God is going to be there for him. Why? Ud'u ki hifla Hashem chassid lo. God has set aside those who are pious, those who are righteous. God is going to protect them. He sets them apart from their enemies. Hashem yishmar bakare elav. And God is going to hear them when they cry out to him in distress. So they'll always be there for Hashem whenever he needs them. All right? And then, interestingly, David switches his tone. Beforehand, he was crying out and complaining about what seemed to be a personal problem, individuals who were attacking him. And now he switches to offer advice to such individuals. And what he tells them is, Rigzu val techta'u imru bilvavchem al mishchavchem udmu sela. All right, so he says that they should tremble before God. They should have a certain reverence before they go and attack another human being unjustifiably. And they should, in doing so, they should refrain from sinning. Anything that's wrong, they should avoid doing. And when they lie in bed at night and they're all to themselves and they have nothing but their own conscience to interact with and to examine, they should examine their hearts and remain silent, not go on the attack, and not do anything harmful. This is the practical advice. And then he continues, Zivchu zivchei tzedek. They should offer up sacrifices of righteousness, ubitchu el Hashem, and have trust in Hashem. Right, what exactly is meant by zivchu zivchei tzedek? They should offer sacrifices of righteousness. What exactly is a sacrifice of righteousness? Various Mefarshim understand it in slightly different ways. If you look, for example, at Rashi comments on Zivchu Zivchei Tzedek, Hatzdiku Ma'asechem, that they should change their deeds, they should do tshuva, they should make their deeds righteous, and in so doing they're sacrificing what I guess would previously be their personal incentives for doing wrong. They're offering those on the korban, and they're changing their acts and doing right. And this is considered an offering of good deeds and of offering of righteousness. Interestingly, Rav Hirsch understands it in a similar vein, but with a slightly different nuance. Rav Hirsch states, and then bring unto God the sacrifices of a dutiful and righteous life. Do this in the spirit of the Shlomim. As a rule, that is what is understood by Zvachim. It is the spirit which stamps all Jewish thought and aspiration, which knows not only how to tremble in God's presence, but also how to rejoice before Him, and how to attain Gila from Ra'ada, how to attain joy from trembling. A spirit which finds peace and joy of life in every act acceptable to God. Bitchu el Hashem, then look with trust to God's help and assistance. Bitchu ba Hashem is trust in God, to feel secure in and through God, an attitude which even the man blessed with good fortune must always maintain, remembering that he must put his trust not in his material possessions, but in God. And this is going to be a theme that we're going to return to in a few moments when we discuss the latter part, the end of this particular Perek of Tehillim. Now, the editor, who wrote the commentary in the Musada Rav Kook version of Tehillim, has a fascinating approach to understanding the Zivchu Zivchei Tzedek. And I'd just like to quote it here for a moment. He says, Halashon Zivchu Zivchei Tzedek, Doma l'ne'emar bebirchat Moshe l'Zvulun u'Yisachar. He finds precedence for this statement back in the in Sefer Dvarim, when Moshe is offering a bracha to the various Shvatim, and the bracha he gives to Zvulun and Yisachar includes the expression Zivchu Zivchei Tzedek. He says, Amim har yikrau sham yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek. Right, that here that they're going to also be offering these sacrifices of righteousness. And there, how is it understood? Mistaber shesham habracha romezet lasocharim hachozrim mimasotehem umakrivim zivchei toda al hatzlacham bedacham ubamischaram. There it refers to people who are engaged in business, people who are busy with perhaps what we might consider the mundane aspects of life, of eking out a living. And when they're successful at this, they offer their thanks to God. They recognize that God is responsible for whatever success they have, their material success as well as their spiritual success. V'omer achasu she'azvachim hem zivchei tzedek kloma she'asocharim rakshu et mamonam b'tzedek v'lo be'avel u'b'mirma. And more than that, it testifies to the fact, in this particular bracha, that when they are successful materially, they will have gained their success not through any guile, not through cheating, not through underhandedness, but rather through an honest and sincere attempt to do business properly and righteously. So it refers, in this case, Zivchei Tzedek are those who sacrifice the perhaps opportunity for greater gain by being scrupulously honest in whatever they do. And there it's an important thing. Right? So the author of the Tehillim then goes on to generalize this a little bit more. The next pasuk goes, Rabim Omrim, the multitude say, Mi yareni tov, who is going to show me goodness? Nasa aleinu or panecha Hashem. Right? And then as if in answer to this question, the author adds, raise up over us the light of your countenance Hashem. And it continues, Natata simcha belibi meyet ganam v'tirasham rabu. You've given us joy, the great joy in our heart, because of all the corn and the wine and the material things that have increased. B'shalom yachtav eshkava ve'ishan ki ata Hashem levadad levetach toshiveni. All right, and then together we'll lie down in peace and sleep the peace of honest men who are comfortable with life and feel no threat, because Hashem alone makes us to dwell in safety. And that's the way the Mizmor ends. So the first question, of course, which the Mefarshim address, are who are these Rabbim? Are these the same Bnei Adam that he refers to as his adversaries in the beginning of the Zemer? Almost all the Mefarshim agree that it's not, but rather it's a general statement that refers to Klal Yisrael. And the question that he seems to be raising is a materialistic one. Mi yareni tov, who will show me goodness? This is what the multitudes ask. Who will show us how to have a good, profitable, and comfortable life? But the answer which he provides is not necessarily one focused on the material aspects, but on the spiritual aspects of life. Nisalenu or panecha Hashem, show us your countenance. The only true happiness, the only true joy that we can get in life is the spiritual goodness that comes from Hashem. And that's the theme of the closing psukim in this. And what I'd like to end with is actually an interesting essay I saw in a sefer called Hameir La'aretz, written by a Rabbi Meir Weiss of the Mir Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, which is an analysis of the various prakim in Sefer Tehillim. And he has a very interesting interpretation of this. He says, in essence, when the multitudes ask, Mi yareni tov, who will show us good? They're asking, who will show us how to achieve simchas hachaim, the joy of life? And the answer is clearly one in spiritual terms. And he says this reflects the basic nature of the Jewish people. And he relates that in Masechet Tanis, in the Gemara. It mentions that the Greeks had issued gzerot. This is during the time of the Chashmonim, but prior to the Chashmonim. The Greeks had issued gzeros forbidding us bringing eitzim lamaracha and bikurim l'Yerushalayim, two gifts, the wood that was used for the mizbeach and the bikurim that were brought to Yerushalayim. These are two gifts people you would bring at certain times. And they were specifically, out of all the various things that they would bring to Yerushalayim and bring to the Beis HaMikdash as part of the Avodah, the Greeks initially outlawed these two things. Marshar comments why specifically these things, And he says that because when they were brought to Yerushalayim, they were accompanied by tremendous celebration and rejoicing. And this was the nature of the Simchas HaChaim, that a Jew would gain the greatest happiness when he was involved in Avodas Hashem. And specifically, these things were major manifestations of that tremendous happiness. And the Greeks realized that if they wanted to destroy the spirit of the Jewish people, especially the monotheistic spirit, the spirit that connects us to God, that the way to do it would be to destroy the way in which we derive Simchas HaChaim, the pleasure of life, the joy of life. And this was what they sought to get rid of as a result. And in fact, the Rav Meir Weiss adds that with regard to Hanukkah, the Gemara states, Chavum v'asom yamim tovim b'halal v'hodah, that you should go and establish, holidays with praise and with expressions of thanks to Hashem. The Rambam in Hilchos Chanukah, in his Mishnah Torah, changes the wording of the Gemara slightly. He says, Shekavum limei simcha v'halal, days of joy and praise. And he adds the word simcha here because he recognizes that ultimately Chanukah is the antidote to what the Greeks attempted to do against us. They tried to destroy our Simchas HaChaim as expressed through our connection to Hashem, and the antidote is Chanukah, which tries to restore that Simcha. So it's absolutely critical that Simcha be an important element of celebrating Chanukah. And I'd like to end with this note because I think it's particularly important with regard to a project that's being done in honor of Sarah Lam Drach, someone who, in my experience, has the most vivacious Simchas of Chaim of almost anybody I know. And may it continue ad mea v'esrei.